When a company turns a profit, have you ever stopped to think about where that money really comes from? I mean, is it just smart marketing, a killer product? Well, today we're digging into a pretty powerful economic theory that has a very specific and, yeah, a kind of controversial answer. We're going to explore this thing called surplus value, an idea that totally changed the way we look at work and wealth.
All right, so here's the game plan for this explainer. First up, we're going to question what productive labor even means. Then, we'll get into the secret of surplus value and the two main ways to pump it up. We'll also ask a big question. Is any of this natural? And finally, we'll look at the big debate that sparked this whole theory.
Okay, let's dive right in with what seems like a simple question, but it's got a surprisingly tricky answer. What does it actually mean for a worker to be productive?
So let's kick things off with a little thought experiment. Is a school teacher a productive worker? I mean, think about it. They create a ton of value for society, right? But do they produce a physical thing, like a factory worker building a car? The theory we're looking at today has a very particular take on this. So this theory basically gives us two completely different ways of looking at it. On the one hand, you've got the general common sense definition. You're productive if your work creates something useful. Simple enough. But within a capitalist point of view, the definition gets way more specific. Your labor is only productive if it creates surplus value, or to put it simply, profit for your employer.
So let's go back to our teacher example. From this perspective, the teacher isn't considered productive just because they're educating kids. No, they're only productive when their work makes the owner of the private school richer. You see how the focus just completely shifts? It moves away from the actual, useful work being done and lands squarely on its power to make a profit.
Okay, so if productive labor is really all about creating profit, then that brings us to the core idea of this whole thing, surplus value. So let's break down how this is all supposed to work. So what in the world is surplus value? Well, the theory defines it like this. It's the value a worker creates that's more than the value of their own ability to work. What they get paid in their wage. To put it another way, it's the value from the unpaid part of your workday that ends up as profit for the boss.
Here's a cool way to think about it. Imagine your 8-hour workday is split right down the middle. The first chunk of time is called necessary labor. This is the time you work to earn your own wages. So maybe that's the first 4 hours. But then, everything after that, the second 4 hours, that's called surplus labor. And during that time, every single bit of value you create goes straight into the owner's pocket as profit.
Right. So if the whole point is to make that surplus labor part of the day as big as possible, how do you actually do that? Well, the theory lays out two main ways. The first way is called absolute surplus value. And honestly, it's the most straightforward method. You just make people work longer. Think about it. If it takes 4 hours to earn your wage, an 8-hour day gives the owner 4 hours of surplus. A 10-hour day gives him 6. It's simple, it's direct, and it's really the foundation of the whole system.
But the second path, relative surplus value, now this is where things get really revolutionary. Instead of just making the workday longer, you make the work itself more efficient. By bringing in new tech or better processes, you can slash that necessary labor time. Let's say you cut it from 4 hours down to 2. Well, now in that same 8-hour day, you've suddenly got 6 hours of surplus labor instead of 4.
So let's just put those two side by side to make it super clear. Absolute surplus value is all about one thing, adding more time, just a longer workday. But relative surplus value, that's all about using technology and efficiency to shrink the slice of the day you work for yourself. The first method is the basic building block for sure, but the second one, that's what really truly changes the game. All of this brings up a really fascinating kind of philosophical question. Is this constant drive for surplus, this whole idea of splitting the workday in two, is that just a natural part of being human? Or is it something created by a very specific economic system?
To explore this idea, the theory uses a great thought experiment. I want you to picture someone living on an island, somewhere in the Asiatic archipelago. And on this island, a plant called sago grows wild, absolutely everywhere.
And sago is basically a natural source of bread.
So, in a place like this, nature is so generous that getting food, the most basic thing for survival, is ridiculously easy. You don't need farms, you don't need factories. You literally just go out and cut your bread right off a tree.
In an environment like that, a person could take care of all their needs, everything, with just 12 hours of work a week. That's it. Because nature's doing most of the heavy lifting, they've got a ton of free time on their hands.
And that gets us to the key question, right? If you only have to work 1 day a week for yourself, why on earth would you choose to work 6 days a week for somebody else? The argument here is that you wouldn't. Not unless you were forced to by a very particular social system. So the creation of surplus value, it's not some law of nature. It's presented as something that developed over time, historically.
Now, it's important to remember that this whole theory of surplus value didn't just pop up out of thin air. It was a direct answer to what was, at the time, a huge debate among economists, a burning question they called it: where does profit actually come from?
So here's what one of the big thinkers of the day, John Stuart Mill, had to say about it. He put it pretty simply. Profit exists because labor produces more than is needed for the laborer to survive.
But the critique of that idea is, well, it's kind of circular, isn't it? It's like saying profit exists because people create a surplus. It tells you that it happens, but it doesn't explain how. It doesn't solve the real puzzle. How can a business owner pay a worker what seems like a fair wage, sell the product at a fair price, and still somehow walk away with more money than they started with?
Mill tried to clarify his point a bit more, and he started focusing on how long products last. His argument was basically that profit comes from the fact that things like tools and materials, well, they last longer than the time it took to actually make them.
But the counterargument to this is really sharp and to the point. It says that this explanation confuses how long a product physically lasts with the labor time, the value that's baked into it. I mean, think about it. If profit was all about durability, then a baker whose bread goes bad in a day could never make a profit, but a machine maker whose product lasts for 20 years would. And we all know that's just not how it works, right?
And that brings everything full circle, right back to our lives today. This whole idea of managing time and pushing for more efficiency, this isn't just some dusty old 19th century theory. You could argue it's the very engine of our modern economy. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Take a look at your own job. Can you see these twin forces at play? How does that constant push for more time and more efficiency shape your work?